This is the story of Beatrice Hargrove, a 74-year-old widow who discovers that her relationship with her son, daughter-in-law, and mother-in-law isn't what she thought it was. When they forget to take her on their beach vacation despite her packed bags and expectations, Beatrice makes a decision that will change all their lives. This tale explores themes of family dynamics, respect, betrayal, and finding personal strength even in your golden years. It's a journey of emotional growth that will resonate with anyone who has ever felt taken for granted by those they love most. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. My name is Beatrice Hargrove, though everyone calls me B. At 74 years old, I've seen my fair share of life's ups and downs. After losing my husband Warren 5 years ago, I've been living alone in our family home in Connecticut, a beautiful colonial house that holds memories in every corner. My son Winston and his wife Vanessa live about 40 minutes away in a modern home near the coast, close to where my daughter-in-law's mother, Judith, also resides. It was a particularly chilly March morning when Winston called me with what sounded like exciting news. "Mom, we're planning a 2-week trip to Cape Cod in May. Vanessa found this gorgeous beachfront property that has 4 bedrooms. We'd love for you to join us." My heart swelled. Since Warren's passing, I'd rarely traveled, finding it difficult to muster enthusiasm for solo adventures. The invitation felt like a lifeline. "That sounds wonderful, Win. Are you sure I won't be intruding?" I asked, already mentally cataloging what I'd need to pack. Winston's laugh came through the phone. "Don't be ridiculous, Mom. It's a family vacation. Vanessa's mom is coming too. We thought it would be nice for both of you to have some relaxation. You deserve it." Over the following weeks, I found myself reinvigorated. I purchased new clothes suitable for the beach, despite the practical voice in my head, questioning whether a woman my age needed new swimwear. I even visited my hairdresser, Marlene, for the first time in months. "Going somewhere special, B?" she asked as she trimmed my silver hair. "My son is taking me to Cape Cod," I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. 2 full weeks by the ocean. I spent hours researching the area, making lists of quaint shops to visit and restaurants to try. I imagined morning walks along the shore with Winston, perhaps some heart-to-heart conversations we hadn't had time for since he became so busy with his investment firm. I pictured evenings on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over the Atlantic. Maybe I'd even find some companionship with Judith, though our previous encounters had been cordial at best. The night before our departure, I carefully packed my suitcase and a small carry bag with essentials. Winston had told me they'd pick me up at 9 in the morning. I set my alarm for 6, wanting plenty of time to be ready. I even prepared a basket of homemade muffins for the road trip. Blueberry, Winston's favorite since childhood. As I settled into bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine anticipation. The world suddenly seemed full of possibilities again. I fell asleep with a smile on my face, dreaming of salt air and new memories waiting to be made. Little did I know that morning would bring a very different reality, one that would force me to confront truths about my family and about myself that I'd been avoiding for far too long. I woke before my alarm, the excitement of the trip acting as its own wake-up call. The May sunshine streamed through my curtains as I went through my morning routine with extra care. I chose a comfortable traveling outfit, linen pants and a light blue blouse that Warren always said brought out my eyes. After breakfast, I double-checked my luggage, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. My medication, my reading glasses, the new novel I'd been saving for this trip. I placed my suitcase and tote bag by the front door at 8:30, then sat in my favorite armchair, watching through the window for Winston's SUV to pull into the driveway. 9 o'clock came and went. I wasn't concerned initially. Winston had always operated on what Warren jokingly called win time, consistently 15 to 20 minutes behind schedule. By 9:30, I felt the first flutter of worry. I called his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. "Hi, Win. It's Mom. Just checking to see if you're on your way. I'm all ready to go. Call me back when you get this." At 10:15, I called again. Same result. I tried Vanessa's number next, also going to voicemail. The flutter in my stomach had grown to a persistent knot. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to calm my nerves. Perhaps they'd had car trouble. Or maybe Vanessa's mother needed extra time getting ready. There were countless reasonable explanations. By 11:30, the knot had transformed into a heavy stone of dread. I'd called both their numbers multiple times, leaving increasingly worried messages. I even tried texting, though I still wasn't entirely comfortable with that form of communication. Are you on your way? Is everything okay? Please call me. At noon, I called my neighbor Elaine to see if she could drive me to Winston's house. Perhaps there had been an emergency, but Elaine informed me she'd seen Winston's car drive past her house early that morning, headed toward the highway with their roof rack loaded. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had left without me. I sat down heavily on my sofa, my mind refusing to process what was happening. Surely there had been a miscommunication. Perhaps they were planning to pick me up on their return trip for some reason, though that made no logical sense. At 1:23 p.m., I remember the time precisely because I was staring at the clock when it happened. My phone chimed with a text message from Winston. Mom, so sorry. In all the chaos of getting ready, we completely forgot about picking you up. Judith had a last-minute packing crisis and it threw off our whole schedule. We're already at the Cape now. We'll take you next time. Promise. Love you. I read the message 3 times, my hands shaking. Forgot about me? How does one forget their mother who was explicitly invited on a family vacation? The casual tone of his message, the absence of any suggestion to remedy the situation, perhaps coming back to get me or arranging transportation, cut deeper than the oversight itself. I looked at my packed bags by the door, the basket of muffins on the counter, and felt a profound sense of foolishness wash over me. I'd been so excited, so grateful to be included, never questioning whether I was truly wanted there. As the afternoon stretched on, I remained in a state of shock. I didn't cry. I didn't call Winston back. Instead, I sat in my silent house, my mind drifting through memories of all the times in recent years when I'd felt similarly invisible. Family dinners where my contributions were overlooked, holidays where my traditions were set aside for Vanessa's family's preferences, conversations that seemed to flow around me rather than include me. By evening, something inside me had hardened. The hurt was still there, but alongside it grew something unexpected, a slow burning anger and a determination that I would not be dismissed so easily. The house grew dark around me as I sat motionless, still processing Winston's message. I hadn't eaten all day, hadn't even unpacked my bags. The initial shock had given way to a profound sense of humiliation. I imagined them driving away, perhaps even discussing me as they went. Had they planned this all along? Was the invitation ever genuine? My phone rang just after 8 p.m., startling me from my thoughts. It was Winston. I let it ring 4 times before answering, struggling to find my voice. "Hello?" I said, the word coming out flatter than I intended. "Mom, did you get my message?" He sounded cheerful, as if he were calling about something as trivial as a delayed dinner plan. "Yes." I couldn't manage more than that single syllable. "I'm really sorry about the mix-up. It was crazy this morning. Judith needed help with her things, and then Vanessa realized we'd forgotten some documents for the rental, and with all that going on, well, we just got our wires crossed." I remained silent, letting the inadequacy of his explanation hang in the air between us. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here, Winston. I've been here all day, waiting, with my bags packed." I paused, then added, "With blueberry muffins I baked for the trip." His sigh carried through the line. "I feel terrible, Mom. I really do. But hey, look on the bright side. You won't have to deal with Judith for 2 weeks. You know how she can be." The casual dismissal of my disappointment ignited something in me. "Is that why you invited me, Winston? As some kind of buffer between you and Judith?" "What? No, of course not. It's just, these things happen. We'll make it up to you. Maybe we can plan another trip later in the summer." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. "I think I'd like to end this call now. Winston, enjoy your vacation." "Mom, don't be like that." I hung up before he could finish. My hand was steady as I set the phone down. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of clarity. For years since Warren's death, I had been shrinking myself, trying to fit into spaces where I was clearly unwanted. I'd been so afraid of being a burden that I'd allowed myself to become an afterthought. I showered and dressed, then made myself a proper breakfast. As I ate, I remembered something Warren used to say when faced with difficult situations. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Winston and Vanessa had shown me exactly where I stood in their priorities. Now it was time to show them who I was. Not just the compliant mother and mother-in-law who could be forgotten without consequence, but Beatrice Hargrove, a woman who had run her own business for 30 years before retirement, who had weathered losses and setbacks with dignity, who deserved basic respect. I picked up my phone and called my bank. After confirming my identity, I spoke to the account manager. "I'd like to make some changes to my accounts," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Specifically, the joint account I share with my son, Winston Hargrove, and the credit cards I've provided as authorized user for him and his wife. "Of course, Mrs. Hargrove. What changes would you like to make?" "I want to cancel the credit cards immediately, and I'd like to transfer all funds from our joint account into my personal account, then close the joint account." "May I ask if there's a problem, Mrs. Hargrove?" The manager's voice held a note of concern. "No problem," I replied. "Just some overdue financial housekeeping." After finishing with the bank, I made one more call, to my lawyer. It was time to revisit my will and certain property arrangements I'd made following Warren's death. I scheduled an appointment for the following week. That evening, as I was finally unpacking my suitcase, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Vanessa. "Having the most amazing time. The beach house is gorgeous. Wish you could see it." Attached was a photo of Winston, Vanessa, and Judith smiling broadly on a sun deck overlooking the ocean. They looked carefree and happy, without a trace of concern about my absence. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned off my phone and went to bed, surprisingly at peace with the decisions I'd made that day. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, I had taken back a measure of control. 3 days passed without any communication from Winston or Vanessa beyond that tone-deaf text message with their beach photo. I spent the time productively, cleaning out closets, meeting with friends I'd neglected, and even visiting a community center to inquire about volunteer opportunities. I was determined not to waste my energy on resentment. On the 4th day, as I was tending to my garden, my phone rang. It was Winston. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided against it. This conversation was inevitable. "Hello, Winston," I answered, my voice neutral. "Mom, we have a problem." His words came out in a rush, tension evident in his tone. "My card was declined at the restaurant last night, and now Vanessa says hers isn't working either. We tried to get cash from the ATM, but our cards aren't working there either." I continued deadheading my roses, saying nothing. "Mom, did you hear me? Our cards are being declined everywhere." "That's strange," I replied evenly. "I checked the online banking and the joint account is closed. What's going on? Did the bank make some kind of mistake?" I set down my gardening shears and took a seat on the stone bench Warren had installed years ago. "No mistake, Winston." I closed the account and canceled the cards. The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear his breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped an octave. "You did what? Why would you do that without talking to me first?" "I thought about it after you forgot me," I said simply. "It seemed like the right time for some financial housekeeping. You're 42 years old, Winston. It's probably overdue." "Mom, this isn't funny. We're stuck here with limited cash. Judith had to pay for dinner last night, and she won't let us forget it. We have the house rental covered, but what about everything else? Food, gas. I imagine you'll figure it out. You're a financial advisor, after all." I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "Is this because we forgot to pick you up? Are you punishing us?" His tone had shifted from shock to indignation. "This isn't punishment, Winston. It's a consequence. And to be clear, you didn't forget to pick me up. You forgot me. There's a difference." "Mom, no. Please let me finish. For years, I've been supplementing your lifestyle because I wanted to, because I thought we were a family who looked out for each other. The joint account was set up after your father died so I could help with Vanessa's business and your house renovations. The credit cards were to help in emergencies. But somewhere along the line, that arrangement became an expectation rather than a gift." "That's not fair," Winston protested. "We've never taken advantage. Haven't you? Last month alone, there were charges for a weekend spa retreat, a golf membership renewal, and designer furniture, none of which were discussed with me. That's not emergency use, Winston." His breathing had become audible now, a sure sign he was struggling to control his temper, a trait he'd inherited from his father. "So what now?" he finally asked. "You're cutting us off completely, over one mistake." I'm establishing boundaries, I corrected him. And it wasn't just one mistake. It was the culmination of a pattern I've allowed to continue for too long. I've made an appointment with my lawyer next week to discuss my will and property arrangements as well. You're changing your will. His voice cracked slightly. Mom, don't you think you're overreacting? Perhaps, I admitted. But I'd rather overreact now than continue to be taken for granted. I suggest you speak with Vanessa and figure out your vacation finances. Maybe Judith can help since she's there with you. I can't believe you're doing this, he said, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. Neither can I, Winston. But here we are. I paused, then added, enjoy the rest of your vacation. We can talk more when you return. I ended the call and sat in my garden for a long time afterward, surrounded by the roses Warren and I had planted together over decades. My hands trembled slightly, but I felt oddly liberated. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself instead of accommodating others at my own expense. My phone buzzed with incoming text messages, first from Winston, then from Vanessa. I didn't read them immediately. Instead, I finished tending to my garden, took a long shower, and prepared myself a nice lunch. Only then did I look at their messages. Winston's read, I can't believe you'd do this to your own family. We're scrambling to figure things out now. Thanks a lot. Vanessa's was more direct. This is so inappropriate, B. Winston is devastated. If you had concerns about the accounts, you should have discussed them like an adult instead of this childish retaliation. I set the phone aside without responding. They still didn't understand that this wasn't about the money itself. It was about respect, consideration, and the painful recognition that I had become dispensable in their lives. Perhaps they never would understand, but that was no longer my primary concern. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. The remaining days of Winston and Vanessa's vacation passed with sporadic, increasingly hostile text messages from both of them. I responded minimally, refusing to engage in their attempts to make me feel guilty. Judith even called once, her tone sickly sweet as she suggested I was having senior moments and should reconsider my hasty decisions. I thanked her for her concern and ended the call. On the day of their scheduled return, I received a text from Winston. We'll be stopping by around 4 to talk. This has gone on long enough. I spent the morning at my lawyer's office, finalizing changes to my will and property arrangements. I hadn't disinherited Winston, but I had restructured things significantly. A portion of my estate would now go to several charities Warren and I had supported over the years. The house would still go to Winston, but with the provision that it couldn't be sold for at least 5 years after my passing, I knew Vanessa had been eager to upgrade it and cash in on the property value. I returned home and prepared for their visit, making a pot of tea and setting out some store-bought cookies, a deliberate departure from my usual homemade offerings. At precisely 3:58 p.m., I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see not only Winston and Vanessa, but Judith as well. They looked tired from their journey, but there was something else in their expressions, a collective determination that immediately put me on guard. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I've made tea." They filed into my living room without the usual hugs or greetings. Winston remained standing while Vanessa and Judith sat stiffly on the sofa. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened," Winston began without preamble. "Your behavior was completely out of proportion to the situation." I poured tea into cups, my hands steady. "Which situation are you referring to, Winston? Being forgotten or the financial changes?" "Both," Vanessa interjected. "B, we've been talking, and we're concerned about your emotional state, these extreme reactions, these impulsive decisions." "There was nothing impulsive about my decisions," I countered, taking a seat in my armchair. I thought about them carefully. Judith leaned forward, her expression one of practiced concern. "Beatrice, at your age, it's not uncommon for emotional regulation to become more difficult. I've been reading about this, and my age has nothing to do with this, Judith," I interrupted, keeping my voice level. "And I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't pathologize my perfectly rational response to being disrespected." Winston ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Warren that it momentarily softened something in me. "Mom, nobody meant to disrespect you. We made a mistake, a single mistake, and your response was to cut us off financially and change your will. How do you know I changed my will?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. Your lawyer's secretary called to confirm something and mentioned the new documents. She thought she was talking to me. I made a mental note to address that breach of confidentiality later. Yes, I did change my will, among other things. And no, it wasn't because of a single mistake. It was because that mistake highlighted how peripheral I've become in your lives. Vanessa scoffed. That's ridiculous. You're Winston's mother. You're important to us. Am I? Important enough to remember I exist? Important enough to consider my feelings? Important enough to call and offer a solution when you realized your mistake, instead of sending a text that essentially said, "Too bad. Maybe next time." Wow. The room fell silent. Winston shifted his weight uncomfortably. We came back early because of this situation, Judith finally said. Cut our vacation short by 3 days. Does that not demonstrate how seriously we're taking your concerns? I looked at her directly. You came back early because you lost access to my money, not because you were worried about my feelings. Winston's face flushed with anger. That's not fair, Mom. We managed fine without your cards after the initial shock. We came back to resolve this situation because we care about you. Then why is this the first time I'm seeing you? If you truly came back early out of concern, why didn't you come straight here? More uncomfortable silence. It was Vanessa who finally answered. We needed time to discuss how to approach this conversation. We were concerned about your state of mind. The implication was clear, and it sparked a flash of genuine anger in me. You mean you needed time to coordinate your strategy, to decide how best to handle the unreasonable old woman who finally stood up for herself? Mom? Winston started. No, I think I understand perfectly now. I set my teacup down with a decisive clink. You three view me as either a convenience or an inconvenience, depending on the situation. When my financial support is needed, I'm a beloved mother and mother-in-law. When my presence might complicate your plans, I'm forgettable. And now that I've demonstrated autonomy, I'm possibly senile. Judith made a sound of protest, but I continued. I'm not changing my mind about the financial arrangements. The cards are canceled, and they will stay canceled. The joint account is closed permanently. My will reflects my current wishes, and while Winston remains my primary heir, there have been adjustments. This feels like punishment, Vanessa said, her voice tight. I understand why you might see it that way, I replied. But from where I sit, it's simply a recalibration of our relationship. I still love you, Winston. Nothing will change that. But love doesn't mean allowing myself to be taken for granted. Winston looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed understanding in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by wounded pride. Fine, he said curtly. If this is how you want things to be, we'll respect that. But don't expect things to just go back to normal between us. The threat hung in the air, but instead of the fear it might have once provoked in me, I felt a strange sense of calm. I don't want things to go back to normal, I said softly. Normal wasn't working for me. They left shortly afterward, the visit having accomplished little beyond clarifying the new dynamics between us. As I watched their car pull away, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and resolve. This rift wouldn't heal quickly, if it healed at all, but for the first time in years, I had honored my own worth instead of compromising it for the sake of peace. 2 weeks passed without a word from Winston or Vanessa. No calls, no texts, not even an email. It was the longest we'd gone without communication since Warren's death, and despite my resolve, the silence weighed on me. Judith, however, had taken to calling regularly with thinly veiled comments about family loyalty and forgiveness, each conversation leaving me more drained than the last. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was sorting through old photographs when my doorbell rang. To my surprise, it was Elaine, my neighbor, looking concerned. B, is everything okay? I haven't seen Winston's car here in a while, and I noticed you've been spending a lot of time alone in the garden. I invited her in for coffee and found myself sharing the whole story. Elaine, a divorced mother of 3 grown children, listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to understanding. And so they're giving you the silent treatment because you stopped bankrolling their lifestyle, she summarized when I finished. That's part of it, I admitted, but I think it's more that I changed the rules without warning. Winston has always viewed me as the accommodating mother who puts everyone else first. Elaine snorted. And now he's discovered you're actually a person with feelings and boundaries. How inconvenient for him. Her blunt assessment startled a laugh out of me, the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. It felt good, like the release of a long-held breath. "Have you been getting out at all?" she asked. "Besides the garden and lawyer visits?" I shook my head. "Not really. I suppose I've been hiding, in a way. Well, that ends today. The community center is having a potluck dinner tonight. Nothing fancy. Just neighbors getting together. You're coming with me." I started to make excuses. I wasn't prepared. I didn't have anything to bring. I wasn't feeling sociable. But Elaine waved them all away. "Enough isolation, B. Warren wouldn't want you sitting alone in this house, and neither do I. We'll stop by the bakery on the way and pick up a dessert." No arguments. That evening, surrounded by neighbors I knew only in passing, I found myself engaged in conversations that had nothing to do with family drama or financial decisions. People asked about my garden, complimented my earrings, discussed books they'd recently read. No one treated me as fragile or difficult or senile. I was just Beatrice Hargrove, a neighbor with opinions and interests of her own. As Elaine drove me home later, I felt a shift in my perspective. "Thank you for dragging me out tonight. I needed that more than I realized. We all need community, B, especially when family is complicated." She paused, then added, "There's a book club that meets at the library every Thursday, and a volunteer program at the hospital that could use someone with your organizational skills." Just saying. The following day, I called the library about the book club and registered for volunteer orientation at the hospital. I also scheduled lunch with an old friend from my working days whom I hadn't seen in years. Step by step, I began rebuilding a life that wasn't centered around waiting for Winston's calls or accommodating Vanessa's preferences. 3 weeks into the silence, my phone rang with Winston's number. My heart jumped, a mixture of hope and apprehension flooding through me. I answered on the third ring, determined to maintain my composure. "Hello, Winston." "Mom." His voice sounded strained. We need to talk." "I'm listening." He cleared his throat. "Vanessa and I have been discussing things. A lot. And I think I understand better now why you were so upset. Not just about the vacation, but about everything." I sat down, surprised by his apparent introspection. "Go on." "The thing is, I've been looking at our bank statements from the past year, really looking at them, and I realized how much we've been relying on your financial support without even acknowledging it. It was just expected." "Yes," I said simply. "It was." Vanessa's mom pointed out some things too. She said if her daughter had forgotten her on a family vacation, she'd have done worse than cancel a few credit cards. I couldn't help but smile at that unexpected alliance. "Judith said that?" "Yeah. Turns out, once she wasn't able to use you as a scapegoat for everything, she and Vanessa started having some real conversations. It's been educational." A silence stretched between us, less tense than before. "I miss you, Mom," he finally said, his voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. "And I'm sorry, really sorry, not just about the vacation, but about a lot of things." The simple apology, delivered without qualifications or excuses, loosened something tight in my chest. "I miss you too, Winston, but I meant what I said about not going back to the way things were. I know. I don't think I want that either. Actually, it wasn't good for any of us." He paused. "Could we come over for dinner this weekend? Just to talk. No agenda, no demands." I considered his request, weighing my lingering hurt against my desire for reconciliation. "Sunday," I decided. "I'll make pot roast." "Your famous pot roast?" There was a hint of the little boy he once was in his tone. "Yes, but Winston, I'm not making it to win you over. I'm making it because I enjoy cooking. There's a difference." "Understood," he said, and I believed that perhaps, for the first time in a long while, he truly did understand. Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that Connecticut specializes in. Clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and flowers bursting into bloom across my garden. I spent the morning preparing the pot roast, chopping vegetables with methodical precision while allowing my mind to wander through possible scenarios for the evening ahead. I was nervous, I realized. Not afraid, exactly, but apprehensive about whether this dinner would mark the beginning of healing or simply highlight how far apart we'd grown. Either way, I was determined to approach it as the woman I was becoming, not the woman I'd allowed myself to be. At 5 o'clock, Winston's car pulled into my driveway. I watched through the window as he and Vanessa sat there for a moment, appearing to have a final conversation before getting out. They walked to my door without the usual confidence I was accustomed to seeing in their postures. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Welcome," I said, stepping aside to let them in. Winston hesitated, then moved forward to embrace me, not the perfunctory hug he'd given me in recent years, but something more genuine. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for having us." Vanessa followed with a more reserved greeting and a bottle of wine. "It's the Cabernet you liked at Christmas," she said, handing it to me. I was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Thank you. It will go perfectly with dinner." We moved to the living room, where I'd set out a cheese plate and crackers. The initial conversation was stilted, focused on safe topics like the weather and neighborhood news. I let them navigate their discomfort, observing how they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Finally, Winston set down his wine glass with purpose. "Mom, before we go any further, I want to say again how sorry I am. For the vacation, yes, but for so much more than that. For taking you for granted, for not seeing you as a whole person with your own life and feelings." His directness surprised me. Winston had always been more likely to sidestep emotional conversations. "After our last talk," he continued, "I went home and really thought about things, about how I've been treating you since Dad died, and I realized I've been acting like you exist only in relation to me, as my mother, as a financial safety net, as a babysitter for when we decide to have kids, not as Beatrice Hargrove, a person in your own right." Vanessa nodded, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I've been doing the same thing, treating you like an extension of our needs instead of respecting your independence. It was easier that way, I guess, less complicated." I took a sip of wine, giving myself time to absorb their words. "Thank you for that recognition. It means a lot to hear you say it. I've also been thinking about the financial stuff," Winston added. "You were right to cut us off. We'd gotten entitled about your support. Looking at our spending habits without your safety net has been eye-opening. We've made some changes," Vanessa offered. "Canceled some subscriptions, reconsidered some expenses we'd been justifying as necessities." I nodded, pleased but cautious. "That sounds healthy. Financial independence is important at any age. Which brings us to another thing," Winston said, exchanging a glance with Vanessa. "We're not here to ask you to reinstate the joint account or credit cards. That chapter is closed, and it should be. But we are hoping we can find a way forward that honors your boundaries while rebuilding our relationship." The simple acknowledgement that they weren't there to negotiate financial arrangements lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. "I'd like that too," I admitted. "I've missed you both, despite everything." The timer in the kitchen chimed, signaling that dinner was ready. As we moved to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted subtly, still carrying the weight of unresolved issues, but with a new undercurrent of possibility. Over pot roast, potatoes, and carrots, the conversation gradually became more natural. Winston asked about my new volunteer work at the hospital, showing genuine interest in how I spent my time. Vanessa mentioned a book she'd read recently that she thought I might enjoy. Small moments of connection, but significant in their departure from our previous dynamic. As I served apple pie for dessert, store-bought, a deliberate choice to show I wasn't trying to impress or placate them, Winston cleared his throat. "There's something else we wanted to talk about, Mom, about the house." I tensed slightly, remembering Vanessa's previous eagerness to update and sell my home. "Oh, what about it? We know you've changed your will to put conditions on the house inheritance, and we respect that completely," he said quickly. "But we were wondering if you'd consider letting us help with some of the maintenance. Not taking over or changing anything you... We were wondering if you'd consider letting us help with some of the maintenance. Not taking over or changing anything you don't want changed," Winston clarified, seeming to sense my apprehension. "Just things like the gutters that need cleaning, or that loose railing on the back steps. Dad used to handle those things, and I know you've been hiring people, but I'd like to help." I studied my son's face, looking for hidden motives, but found only sincerity. "That would be appreciated," I said carefully, "when the house does require constant attention." "It's a beautiful home," Vanessa said, surprising me. "I know I've made comments in the past about updating it or even selling, but being away from it these past weeks made me realize how much character and history it has. I can see why you love it so much." I didn't fully trust this sudden reversal, but I acknowledged it with a nod. "Warren and I built our life here. Every corner holds memories. I remember when Dad converted the attic into my bedroom," Winston said, smiling at the memory. He let me help sand the floorboards. I thought I was so grown up, working alongside him. You were 11, I recalled, feeling a warmth spread through me at the shared memory. Warren said you were the most meticulous sander he'd ever worked with. The conversation flowed into reminiscences about Warren, something we'd rarely done together since his passing. It felt healing to speak of him openly, to laugh about his stubbornness and marvel at his patience. For the first time in years, I felt like we were truly sharing something meaningful rather than just occupying the same space. As the evening drew to a close, Winston helped me clear the table while Vanessa insisted on washing dishes, another departure from previous visits when they'd made quick exits after meals. At the door, Winston hesitated. Mom, I know things won't just go back to normal overnight, but I hope this is a start. It is, I assured him. A good start. Vanessa surprised me with a genuine hug. Thank you for dinner, and for giving us the chance to begin making amends. After they left, I sat in my garden watching the sunset, feeling cautiously optimistic. The evening hadn't resolved everything, but it had opened a door that I'd feared might remain permanently closed. There would be more conversations, more adjustments as we navigated this new territory. But for the first time in months, I felt hopeful about our future as a family, not because I'd compromised my newfound boundaries, but because they had begun to respect them. Over the next month, Winston and I established a new Sunday routine. He would come over in the morning to tackle whatever house maintenance needed attention. Then we'd share lunch and conversation before he headed home. Sometimes Vanessa joined him, sometimes not. But the time he and I spent together began to heal the rift between us. During one of these Sundays, as we sat on the porch drinking lemonade after Winston had repainted the mailbox post, he brought up something unexpected. Mom, do you remember when I was in college and Dad and I had that huge fight? The one where I didn't come home for almost a year? I set down my glass, surprised by the sudden reference to a painful chapter in our family history. Of course I remember. It was a difficult time for everyone. Winston stared out at the garden, his expression pensive. Dad was right, you know. About the friends I was hanging around with, about the choices I was making. I was too proud to admit it then. But he saw what I couldn't, that I was heading down a destructive path. I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. When I finally came home that Christmas, you never pushed for an apology or an explanation. You just welcomed me back like I'd never been gone. He turned to look at me directly. I always thought that was your way, to smooth things over, to make peace at any cost. But now I'm wondering if that was really what you wanted, or if you were just doing what you thought a mother should do. The question caught me off guard with its insight. I took a moment to consider my answer. I wanted my family whole again, I finally said. But yes, there was a part of me that wished we'd addressed the underlying issues, instead of simply moving past them. Your father and I discussed it privately, but we decided not to risk driving you away again by demanding accountability. Winston nodded slowly. And that became our pattern, didn't it? Me behaving poorly, you accommodating, neither of us really addressing the real issues. I suppose it did, I agreed, feeling a curious mix of sadness and relief at this frank assessment. Until now. Until you finally had enough, he corrected with a rueful smile. It took some time, but I'm grateful you did, Mom. I needed the wake-up call. That evening, after Winston left, I found myself reflecting on other moments in our family history when I'd chosen accommodation over confrontation. There had been many such instances, each one seemingly insignificant on its own, but collectively forming a pattern that had ultimately led to me being forgotten on that fateful vacation day. The next morning, I received a text from Vanessa, asking if she could stop by that afternoon. It was unusual for her to seek time alone with me, and I felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with caution. She arrived promptly at 2, looking uncharacteristically nervous. After declining my offer of tea, she sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa. "B, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her fingers twisting in her lap. Something I should have told you years ago, actually. I prepared myself for whatever confession might be forthcoming. Had she been the one to instigate excluding me from the vacation? Was there some long-standing resentment she needed to express? The beach house in Cape Cod, she continued. The one we went to last month. It wasn't a rental. I frowned, confused by this revelation. What do you mean? It belongs to my family. To my mother, specifically. She bought it 5 years ago as an investment property. Vanessa couldn't quite meet my eyes. We've been using it for vacations several times a year, without inviting you. The information settled over me slowly, its implications unfurling like a map of deception. 5 years, I repeated, since right after Warren died. Vanessa nodded miserably. Mom suggested that first trip as a way to help Winston deal with his grief. But then it became a regular thing, and it just seemed easier not to mention it to you. Winston worried you'd feel left out, and I didn't push the issue. And this last time, when I was explicitly invited and then forgotten, she had the grace to look deeply ashamed. That was my fault. I told Winston we should include you for once, since you'd seemed so down lately. But then Mom started making comments about how the atmosphere would be different with you there, how we'd have to adjust our usual routines. She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. Winston got cold feet. He suggested we could just tell you something came up and postpone, but I'm the one who said we should just go and deal with the fallout later. I sat very still, absorbing this confirmation of my worst suspicions. They hadn't forgotten me. They had deliberately excluded me, then lied about it. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Vanessa finally looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Because I can't keep pretending. Because you deserve the truth. And because I'm genuinely sorry. Not just for the lie, but for all the times I've treated you as an afterthought, rather than as Winston's mother and a person I should respect." I nodded slowly, appreciating her honesty even as the pain of betrayal washed through me anew. "Does Winston know you're here?" "No. He'll probably be furious that I told you. He's been so focused on rebuilding your relationship, and he's worried this would set things back." She hesitated. "But I don't think we can build anything real on a foundation of lies." In that moment, I felt an unexpected sense of kinship with my daughter-in-law. Perhaps for the first time, I was seeing the real Vanessa, not the polished, sometimes dismissive woman I'd come to know, but someone capable of moral courage and genuine remorse. "Thank you for your honesty," I said finally. "What hurts to hear, but I'd rather know the truth." "What will you do now?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "About Winston, I mean." I considered the question carefully. "I'm not sure yet. I need time to process this. But I do know that whatever happens next, it needs to be based on truth, not convenient fictions." After Vanessa left, I took a long walk through the neighborhood, trying to sort through my tangled emotions. The deliberate exclusion stung far worse than the idea of being accidentally forgotten. Yet Vanessa's decision to come clean, knowing it might disrupt the fragile peace we'd established, spoke to the possibility of real change. By evening, I had reached a decision about how to move forward. I texted Winston, "We need to talk. Tomorrow at 11. It's important." His reply came quickly. "Everything okay? Should I be worried?" I considered how to respond, then simply wrote, "Just be honest. That's all I'm asking now." Winston arrived at 11 sharp the next morning, his face etched with concern. I led him to the garden patio, where I'd set up 2 chairs facing each other, a deliberate choice that would force us to look at each other during what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "Mom, what's going on? Your text had me worried all night." I studied my son's face, searching for signs of the little boy I had raised to value honesty and integrity. Vanessa came to see me yesterday. She told me about the Cape Cod house. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. The color drained from his face, followed by a flush of shame that crept up his neck. He opened his mouth, closed it, then slumped back in his chair. "She shouldn't have done that," he finally said, his voice hollow. "No, Winston. She absolutely should have. One of you should have told me the truth years ago." I kept my voice level, determined not to let hurt overwhelm this crucial moment. 5 years of vacations at a house your mother-in-law owns. 5 years of deliberate exclusion, and then a calculated decision to continue that exclusion while pretending it was a simple mistake. He couldn't hold my gaze. It wasn't as premeditated as it sounds. "Then explain it to me. Help me understand how my son could lie to me so casually, so repeatedly." Winston ran his hands over his face, a gesture reminiscent of his father when cornered. "It started innocently enough. After Dad died, Judith offered her beach house as a getaway for us. Just a weekend to breathe, to process. I didn't invite you because, honestly, I needed space from grief. From everything that reminded me of Dad. I nodded, understanding that part at least. Grief manifests differently for everyone. But then it became a regular thing. He continued. Quarterly trips to the beach house. And it became our thing. Me, Vanessa, Judith. A separate part of my life that didn't include you. And you never thought I might enjoy being included? Even once. He winced. And I told myself you wouldn't enjoy it. That you'd be uncomfortable with Judith's strong personality. That you preferred being at home. I created justifications that made my selfishness seem considerate. And last month, when I was explicitly invited, then forgotten. Winston's shoulders sagged further. That was the worst of all. Vanessa suggested including you, genuinely thinking it was time. I agreed initially, then got cold feet after Judith raised concerns about changing our usual dynamics. But I couldn't bring myself to uninvite you directly. So when the day came, he trailed off, unable to complete the admission. You left without me and pretended it was an accident. I finished for him. And then you maintained that lie, even as you supposedly tried to rebuild our relationship these past weeks. He nodded miserably. I told myself we were making progress, that bringing up the lie would only set us back. I convinced myself I was protecting our relationship, but really I was protecting myself from facing what I'd done. We sat in silence for several minutes, the spring breeze rustling through the garden Warren had designed with such care. I thought about how disappointed he would be in our son's behavior, yet how he would still advocate for compassion and understanding. I want you to understand something, Winston, I finally said. The most painful part isn't that you excluded me from vacations. It's that you thought so little of me, of my resilience, of my capacity to understand, that you chose deception over honesty. You underestimated me as both a mother and as a person. Tears welled in his eyes. I know, and I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything. I believe you're sorry now, but I'm not sure you understand why what you did was so damaging. It wasn't just about a vacation or hurt feelings. It was about respect, Winston. Basic human respect. What can I do? He asked, his voice breaking slightly. To make this right. I considered his question carefully. I don't think this is something that can be made right with a single gesture or apology. This is about rebuilding trust, and that takes time. It takes consistent honesty, even when that honesty is uncomfortable. I want to do that, he said earnestly. I want to be worthy of your trust again. Then start by telling me the truth, always, no matter how difficult. No more convenient fictions. No more protecting me from realities you think I can't handle. I paused, then added, and I think we need to take a step back from our Sunday routine for a while. I need some space to process all of this. His face fell, but he nodded in acceptance. I understand. Whatever you need, Mom. As he prepared to leave, Winston turned back to me with a question that seemed to have been weighing on him. Mom, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? Truly forgive me. I looked at my son. Flawed, human, capable of both thoughtlessness and remorse, and felt the complex love that only a parent can know. I already forgive you, Winston. But forgiveness doesn't mean there aren't consequences. It doesn't mean immediate restoration of trust. I know, he said softly. I'll work to earn that trust back, however long it takes. After he left, I sat alone in the garden for a long time, contemplating the path forward. The truth had been painful to hear, but it had cleared away the fog of deception that had hung between us. Now, at least, we could see each other clearly, with all our imperfections exposed to the light. That evening, I called Elaine and asked if she'd like to join me for a community theater performance the following weekend. I think I'm ready to expand my world a bit more, I told her. Good for you, Bea, she replied warmly. It's about time. Summer arrived with a burst of heat and humidity typical of Connecticut in July. 3 months had passed since my confrontation with Winston about the Cape Cod deception, and our relationship had entered a new phase. More distant than before, but also more honest. We spoke weekly by phone, conversations that were sometimes awkward but always authentic. He respected my request for space, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. Meanwhile, my own life had blossomed in unexpected ways. My volunteer work at the hospital had expanded to 3 days a week, where I found myself coordinating a team of volunteers who organized reading materials for patients. The book club at the library had introduced me to a diverse group of women who shared my love of literature and lively discussion. And through Elaine, I'd begun taking a twice-weekly yoga class specifically designed for seniors, where I discovered muscles I'd forgotten existed and a sense of physical confidence I hadn't felt in years. On a particularly warm Thursday afternoon, as I was leaving the library after book club, I quite literally bumped into a gentleman reaching for the same door. "Excuse me," we both said simultaneously, then laughed at the synchronicity. He was tall, perhaps a few years older than me, with a full head of silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Please, after you," he insisted, holding the door. I thanked him and stepped outside, expecting that to be the end of our brief encounter, but he followed, clearing his throat slightly. "I couldn't help noticing the book you're carrying," he said, gesturing to the novel tucked under my arm. "Kazuo Ishiguro is one of my favorites." "Mine too," I replied, surprised by both his observation and the commonality. "We just discussed this one in our book club." "The Thursday Afternoon Literary Society?" he asked. "I've heard wonderful things about your group." "I'm Elliot, by the way." "Elliot Donovan. Beatrice Hargrove," I introduced myself, feeling an unexpected flutter of nerves. "But everyone calls me B." We stood there awkwardly for a moment before Elliot spoke again. "I don't suppose you'd be interested in continuing this literary discussion over coffee. There's a lovely cafe just around the corner." My first instinct was to decline. I had groceries to buy, laundry waiting at home, the mundane tasks that had structured my solitary life. But something about his gentle manner and genuine interest made me reconsider. "I'd like that," I heard myself say. One coffee led to an exchange of phone numbers, which led to an invitation to attend a chamber music concert the following week. By the end of July, Elliot and I had established a comfortable rhythm of shared activities: museum visits, concerts, walks in the park, and conversations that ranged from books to travel to our shared experiences of loss. Elliot had lost his wife to cancer 8 years earlier, and though he had 2 daughters who lived out of state, he'd been largely on his own since then. "It takes courage to build a new life at our age," he commented one evening as we walked back to my house after dinner. "To resist the temptation to merely exist in the shadow of who we once were." His observation struck a chord in me. "I'm still learning that courage," I admitted. For a long time after my husband died, I defined myself primarily as Winston's mother. It was a comfortable role, but a limiting one. "And now?" he asked, his eyes curious in the twilight. "Now I'm discovering that there are many aspects to who I am. Volunteer, friend, book club member, yoga enthusiast." I smiled shyly. "And now, perhaps, something of a late bloomer in the romance department." Elliot's pleased laugh warmed me more than the summer evening. "Late bloomers often produce the most beautiful flowers, or so my gardener daughter tells me." Our relationship progressed slowly, deliberately, neither of us feeling the need to rush what was developing between us. Elliot was respectful of my boundaries and my ongoing navigation of family complications. I appreciated his perspective as someone who had emerged on the other side of similar challenges with his own children. In late August, Winston called with a request that caught me by surprise. "Mom, I know I'm not in a position to ask for favors, but I was hoping you might consider having dinner with us next weekend. Both of us, and Judith too." I hesitated. Memories of past family dinners with Judith, where I'd often felt sidelined or dismissed, surfacing immediately. "May I ask why?" "Honestly, because we've all been doing some serious thinking since everything happened. Vanessa and I have been seeing a family therapist, trying to work through some of our issues. And surprisingly, Judith has been joining us for some sessions." This was unexpected news. "Really? Judith is willingly attending therapy?" Winston's chuckle held a note of genuine amusement. "I know. I was shocked too. But she's actually been surprisingly receptive. The therapist has helped us all see some patterns we were stuck in. And one thing we all agreed on was that we owe you a proper, collective apology, not just for the Cape Cod situation, but for how we've treated you generally." I thought about it for a moment. "Would it be all right if I brought someone with me? A friend who's become important to me recently." There was a brief pause before Winston replied, "Of course. We'd love to meet anyone who matters to you, Mom." The dinner was set for the following Saturday. I invited Elliot, explaining the complicated dynamics he might be walking into. "Are you sure you want to subject yourself to this potential minefield?" I asked after outlining the history. Elliot took my hand, his expression serious. "B, at our age, We come with history, complex, messy, beautiful history. I'd be honored to support you through this important moment with your family. The night of the dinner, as Elliot drove us to Winston's house, I found myself uncharacteristically nervous. What if it's a disaster? What if Judith hasn't really changed at all? Then we'll leave early and get ice cream instead, Elliot replied matter-of-factly, earning a grateful smile from me. Winston opened the door before we could knock, his expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. Mom, you look wonderful. And this must be Elliot Donovan, my companion introduced himself, extending a hand which Winston shook warmly. It's really nice to meet you, Elliot. Please come in. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic, and I was surprised to see the dining room table set with care, including the good china that Vanessa usually considered too formal for family meals. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and greeted me with a genuine hug before introducing herself to Elliot. Judith appeared last, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. She approached me with uncharacteristic hesitation. Beatrice, thank you for coming, she said, her usual commanding tone notably absent. And for bringing your friend. It's good to see you looking so well. The dinner itself was surprisingly pleasant. Elliot charmed everyone with stories from his years as a history professor, and the conversation flowed more naturally than I could have anticipated. When dessert was served, a homemade apple pie that Vanessa had prepared using my recipe, a thoughtful touch that didn't go unnoticed. Winston cleared his throat. Mom, we asked you here tonight because we wanted to formally apologize. All of us together. He looked at Vanessa and Judith, who both nodded encouragingly. We've been working through a lot as a family, and one thing that's become clear is how poorly we've treated you over the years. Judith spoke next, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I owe you the biggest apology, Beatrice. I've spent years creating an artificial competition between us for Winston and Vanessa's attention. Our therapist helped me recognize that my behavior stemmed from my own insecurities, not from anything you ever did or said. Vanessa reached across the table to touch my hand. We've all been taking hard looks at our actions and the family dynamics we've created, and we want you to know that we're committed to doing better, to treating you with the respect and love you deserve. I glanced at Elliot, who gave me an encouraging nod, then looked back at my family, this imperfect, struggling, evolving family that was mine despite all our missteps. Thank you, I said simply. That means a great deal to me, and while I can't promise that everything will immediately go back to what you might consider normal, I am open to building something new together, something better. Winston raised his glass. To new beginnings, he proposed, and to hard-earned wisdom, Elliot added, raising his own glass alongside mine. As we clinked glasses around the table, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead wouldn't be perfectly smooth. Real relationships never are. But we were all moving forward with our eyes open, and that made all the difference. Fall arrived in Connecticut with a spectacular display of color, transforming the landscape into a canvas of reds, golds, and oranges. My relationship with Elliot had deepened into something steady and nurturing, while my relationship with Winston and Vanessa continued to heal through honest conversations and consistent effort on all sides. Even Judith and I had reached a tentative peace, though we would likely never be close friends. In early October, Winston called with an unexpected proposition. Mom, I have something to ask you, and I want you to feel completely free to say no if it doesn't appeal to you. He sounded nervous but determined. Judith has offered her Cape Cod house for Columbus Day weekend. All of us will be going. Me, Vanessa, and Judith. And we'd like to invite you and Elliot to join us. For real this time. The invitation brought a rush of complex emotions. Appreciation for the gesture, lingering hurt from past exclusion, and uncertainty about spending an entire weekend in close quarters with Judith. You don't need to answer right away, Winston added quickly. Talk it over with Elliot and let me know. No pressure, I promise. That evening, as Elliot and I walked along the riverfront park near my home, I shared the invitation with him. What do you think? I asked after explaining the history and significance of the Cape Cod house. Elliot considered the question thoughtfully. I think it's a meaningful olive branch. But more importantly, what do you think, B? Is this something you're ready for? I watched a fallen leaf skitter across our path, carried by the autumn breeze. Part of me wants to go, to reclaim what was denied to me for so long. But another part worries it might be too much, too soon. What's the worst that could happen? Elliot asked practically. It could be awkward, tense. Judith might revert to her old patterns. I might feel like an outsider again. And if that happens, I smiled at his calm approach to my concerns. Then we leave early and get ice cream instead. Exactly. He agreed with a warm smile. But it might also be an opportunity for healing, for creating new memories to replace the hurt of being excluded. After further consideration, I called Winston with our decision. We'd like to accept your invitation, but with one condition. Elliot and I would like to drive ourselves, so we have our own transportation if needed. Completely understood, Winston replied, sounding genuinely pleased. We'll make sure the blue bedroom is prepared for you both. It has the best ocean view. The following Friday, Elliot and I drove to Cape Cod, arriving at the beach house mid-afternoon. The property was even more beautiful than I had imagined. A sprawling, clapboard house with wraparound porches, situated on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. Winston and Vanessa greeted us warmly, helping with our luggage while pointing out features of the house and grounds. Judith is taking a nap, Vanessa explained as she showed us to our room. A spacious chamber with large windows framing a spectacular ocean view. She was up early getting everything ready. The thought of Judith making preparations for my arrival was still strange to consider, but I appreciated the effort it represented. That first evening set the tone for the weekend. We gathered on the porch for drinks before dinner, watching the sun set over the water in a blaze of pink and gold. Judith joined us, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her in a casual sweater and slacks. "Beatrice, Elliot, I hope you'll feel at home here," she said, handing us each a glass of wine. "This place has always been special to me, and I'm glad to finally share it with you both." The sincerity in her voice caught me by surprise. I accepted the wine with a genuine smile. "Thank you for having us, Judith. It's a beautiful spot." Dinner was served family style at a large table overlooking the water. Clam chowder, fresh bread, and a lobster pasta that Vanessa and Judith had prepared together. The conversation flowed more naturally than I could have anticipated, with Elliot sharing stories of his travels and Winston discussing his recent interest in sailing. As we finished dessert, a cranberry crisp with vanilla ice cream, Judith tapped her water glass gently to get everyone's attention. "I want to say something," she began, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Having everyone here together means a great deal to me, and I owe Beatrice a particular debt of gratitude." I looked at her with surprise. "Me?" Judith nodded. "Ahing, when you stood up for yourself last spring, it set off a chain reaction in our family. It forced us all to examine patterns we'd fallen into, patterns that weren't healthy for any of us. Your courage to demand respect opened the door for healing that I didn't even realize we needed." Her words touched me deeply. "Thank you for that, Judith. It wasn't easy for any of us. The best growth rarely is," she replied with a small smile. The remainder of the weekend unfolded with a genuine warmth I hadn't dared to hope for. We took long walks along the shore, played board games when an afternoon shower kept us indoors, and shared meals that became progressively more relaxed and laughter-filled. Winston and I even had a private moment on the beach Sunday morning, watching the sunrise together in comfortable silence before he spoke. "You know, Mom, I've been coming to this house for years, but this is the first time it's truly felt like a family vacation." His words resonated with my own feelings. And that's because we're finally being a real family, messy, imperfect, but honest with each other. On our final morning, as Elliot and I prepared to depart, Judith approached me with a small wrapped package. "A small thank you for coming," she said, handing it to me, and perhaps a new tradition. Inside was a beautiful photo frame, containing a picture taken the previous evening. All 5 of us on the porch at sunset, smiling genuinely into the camera. The frame was engraved with a simple message: "Family, October 2025. "It's perfect," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Thank you." As Elliot and I drove home later that day, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me for years. "You know," I said as we crossed the state line back into Connecticut, "I used to think that being forgotten for that vacation was one of the worst things that had happened to me in recent years. But now I'm wondering if it wasn't also one of the best." Elliot glanced over, eyebrows raised. "How so?" "Because it forced me to stand up for myself. And in doing so, I not only changed how my family sees me, but how I see myself." I reached over to squeeze his hand. "I'm not just Winston's mother or Warren's widow anymore. I'm Beatrice Hargrove, volunteer, friend, book club enthusiast, yoga practitioner, And, as it turns out, a woman capable of starting a new chapter in her 70s. Elliot brought my hand to his lips for a gentle kiss, and I, for one, am very grateful for that woman and all her courage. As December arrived, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined months earlier. My relationship with Elliot brought joy and companionship, while my family relationships had evolved from superficial to genuine. Most importantly, I'd become a woman who valued her own worth. In early December, Winston and Vanessa invited Elliot and me to dinner at a new Italian restaurant. After ordering, Winston cleared his throat. "Mom, Elliot, we have something for you both." Vanessa handed me an envelope containing 2 airline tickets to St. Lucia for Valentine's Day week and a confirmation for a beachfront suite. "It's a vacation," Winston explained with a smile. "A proper one that you won't be forgotten for." I was touched, but hesitated. "This is too generous. Please," Winston interrupted gently. "We want to do this for you. You've both been so important to our growth this year." Elliot examined the resort information with interest. "It does look magnificent, B, and February in New England is hardly pleasant. There's one more thing," Winston added, his expression serious. "Vanessa and I have decided we're ready to start a family." The news surprised me. "You're pregnant?" Vanessa shook her head. "Not yet, but we're trying. We've been waiting until we felt we had a healthier family foundation. A lot of that is because of you, Mom," Winston said, "because of the hard lessons you forced us to learn about respect, honesty, and family." I felt tears welling in my eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll go to St. Lucia," Vanessa suggested, "and that you'll be an involved grandmother when the time comes. On your terms." Elliot squeezed my hand supportively. I looked at my son and daughter-in-law with new clarity, no longer as the couple who had hurt me, but as growing people creating something better. "We would love to go to St. Lucia," I said finally. 2 months later, as Elliot and I walked along a pristine Caribbean beach at sunset, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. What had begun as a painful exclusion had become the catalyst for reclaiming my worth, finding unexpected love, and rebuilding my family on healthier terms. "Penny for your thoughts?" Elliot asked, his hand warm in mine. "I was just thinking about reservations," I replied. "For dinner?" I smiled. "No, about how sometimes having your reservation forgotten can lead you exactly where you need to be." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. At 74, I had discovered that it's never too late to demand respect, to find love, or to begin again. "You know," Elliot said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about making a different kind of reservation." "Oh." He stopped walking and turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. "B, you've shown me that life can begin anew at any age. Would you consider making a permanent reservation with me? As my wife?" The question took my breath away, but my heart knew the answer immediately. "Yes," I said, feeling younger than I had in decades. That's one reservation I would never want to miss. As we sealed our promise with a kiss, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago. Forgotten, hurt, but ultimately resilient. That forgotten vacation had become the first step on a journey toward a life more fulfilling than I could have imagined. Proof that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as disappointments.